Thank you. Um, and good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate we're going to talk about academic integrity in hour 8 of a very full day. So I hope that Joanne also plied you with some chocolate or some sort of sugar in the break prior to her talk. I should have sent that up with her. I apologize that I can't be with you today, so I'm looking forward to an opportunity in the future when I can come up and meet everybody. I'm going to keep today at a pretty high level because academic integrity policies are kind of the thing that are need to know in the moment. And so I thought we'd just do a bit of an introduction to how things are managed at the U of A, and then you'll have a little bit of information in your back pocket should you ever need it. So I come to you today as the academic officer in the Office of Education. Um, and that role is relatively new, about 2.5 years. And it was just parsing off some of the Vice Dean of Education's duties to make things a little bit more manageable on her portfolio, to be honest. So I am responsible for the academic integrity concerns, academic appeals, should that happen, and practicum interventions. So it's a bit of a mixed bag kind of portfolio. Um, I recognize that you are all on Treaty 8, and as I said, I wish I was there with you. But I am in Edmonton on Treaty 6 currently. And how fortunate are we now that we have a campus that, spans all three treaties across the province. And I have no disclosures or conflict of interests to declare. So, why does academic integrity matter? I thought I'd start a little bit by framing it about how I think about academic integrity within the confines of the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. And really, it's not just about catching misconduct or enforcing rules. It's connected to professional identity formation because I think about it from a values-based perspective. And so in health professions, obviously, the values that we expect in practice are things like honesty and accountability and responsibility. And all of those things start here when students are approaching their academic work. So when we talk about academic integrity, we're also asking what kind of professional is this student going to be, going to be, and how are they becoming that? So as instructors, we're not just delivering content. I think we're also setting and upholding standards. And students pay attention to that kind of thing. Um, and so, one of the things that I want to leave you with today is how we respond to academic integrity concerns as teachers. Probably matters, just as much as the curriculum that we're delivering in ourselves or delivering ourselves. Um, and not responding to academic integrity, I would almost argue, becomes part of the hidden curriculum, um, which we are all, always trying to prevent. So, throughout this session, I'm going to, keep coming back to how academic integrity shapes student learning and professional identity, and and try and tie those concepts to actual policy. So the University of Alberta moved, it's probably about a year and a half ago now. The student academic integrity policy was brand new, and they moved to a restorative approach. And so that meaning that many of us had to go and have training in what restorative justice looks like and how to manage those sorts of things. So there's been this deliberate shift from misconduct to academic integrity. The focus now being not just a purely punitive kind of system, but focusing on accountability, on student learning, and giving students opportunity to repair the harm that they may have caused by having an academic mishap. So this doesn't decrease our standards and it doesn't change the way that we respond, because the responses are supposed to still be proportionate. They're just supposed to be a little bit more educational. And so we still have formal sanctions that would have been the kinds of things that were in place when we all went through post-secondary. And those are there for us to use when needed. But there's this new pathway that they call non-disciplinary accountability options, or NDAOs, because we love our acronyms. And the goal of an NDAO is to put some structure to this educational response. And it's taken me a while to wrap my head around it, to be perfectly honest. But I do see the value now, particularly in our health professions programs, like the medical school, because there's this opportunity for us to address an academic integrity concern, but to not have that follow the student for the rest of their career, which I think in the past there was that chance of a sanction being something that could potentially haunt them forever. And now we have an opportunity to actually support them in their learning journey without that jeopardy. So, what does this restorative approach actually mean in practice? So, this is more at a systems level. Uh, there's an expectation that there's accountability. Now, interestingly enough, a student can enter into an NDAO without admitting guilt. They're just taking accountability for the situation and the responsibility to try to repair the harm that's been done. Um, as I said earlier, the responses are supposed to be of an educational nature, and I'll share some of those with you in a few slides, and proportionate to whatever the offense was. Uh, we really, yeah, under a restorative system, fairness and transparency is supposed to be sort of the hallmarks of what we're working towards. And the institutional goal is obviously upholding the standards and the academic validity of the degree that students are getting. So looking at all of that, and if that's how the system's working, then what does it mean for us as faculty members that are, working within this system? And how do we align with it? Um, well, as I said earlier, it's not just about enforcing some rules, it's about supporting our learners as they professionally develop. Um, and so my mantra is that as with most things, if we start from an approach of curiosity and not necessarily, move to judgment immediately, that we understand that we're supporting students to be accountable and not avoid when a mistake has happened. Again, responding proportionately, and that we're not determining the outcomes, and not every academic integrity concern actually would require formal discipline. Some do. Um, and so the interesting thing about the student academic integrity policy is it doesn't ask us as individual instructors to decide the outcome. Um, it's that's all done at the level of the Office of Education, and we'll get more into that in a second. So, what is our role in a restorative system? And this is probably the most important slide I wanted to emphasize today. There's always, in the time that I've been in this role, I've had many conversations around this. I don't want to harm the student. And so, it was a small little slip. And if I report this, this is something that, could be potentially on their academic record and impact their professional goals, impact their CARMS match, impact CPSA licensure, all those kinds of things. But the reality is, in a restorative system, as I said earlier, we're allowing students to take accountability for something, and we're not having a penalty attached to that that's going to haunt them for the rest of their career. Not reporting could actually deny them the opportunity to start to develop some of the integrity skills that they may be needing to develop professionally. And if we're inconsistent in our responses across the faculty or the institution, then we're obviously undermining fairness and trust. And so academic integrity, as with everything, is grounded in a core set of values. And these aren't just academic expectations, but they're the same kinds of values that we would expect in professional practice. And so honesty, trust, fairness, respect, courage, responsibility, and not that separate from our professional values that we're trying to instill in our students. So then how do you instill these values in our teaching? Well, we need to be very clear in our expectations. Um, we want to be consistent in our response. We want to design assessments that support integrity and allow students to make the right decision. We want to make sure that we're approaching students with curiosity when concerns arise. And we want to make sure, that we're sort of living these values in a very practical way so that they come out in how we teach, how we communicate, and how we respond. So I promise I'm not going to share with you the entire policy because it's 10 after 4 and I'm trying to stick to time or even, finish a little early and allow you for some questions. So policy light, because the student academic integrity policy actually even has 5 companion appendices to go with it. It's pretty heavy. And the procedure document itself it's exactly like a standard operating procedure. So when academic integrity concerns happen, it's easy for us to remain consistent because the rule book is all there. Um, so the policy reflects everything that we've discussed, allowing students to take accountability for academic misconduct without even having admitted guilt, really. Um, but it does create space for them to admit that there's been a mistake and to try to repair some trust. And so what is academic misconduct? How do we define that? Um, Pretty similar to probably what you were thinking, plagiarism. So using someone's work or ideas without appropriate acknowledgement. Often plagiarism is accidental because students just don't know how to properly paraphrase. They do not know how to properly cite. Um, Sometimes it's intentional. Examination cheating, that one's pretty obvious. Contract cheating is actually something that's become more of a thing. In the fact that there are paper mills and um, those kinds of services available to students. Unauthorized collaboration is working with others when there was an expectation that it be an individual type of work. Um, Unauthorized resubmission, so using the same piece of work twice. Misuse of University of Alberta academic materials or other assets, that's the catch-all. And then there is research and scholarship misconduct. And there is actually an entire research integrity policy at the University of Alberta, and the two would intersect if that was the case. Um, I did want to talk about misrepresentation of facts with a little bit more detail because that's where things like inappropriate use of artificial intelligence tools is probably going to end up fitting in that and potentially plagiarism. But there's also the misrepresentation of facts also speaks to the veracity and the integrity that we're expecting from students. And so I have seen cases where, so for example, a student puts in a excused absence for illness. Turns out they're not ill, but they actually needed time off for a personal event. That's misrepresentation of facts. Things like hiding a mistake rather than admitting to it, fabricating or altering data, misleading documentation, that sort of thing. And when I say that these are things I've seen, this is across the faculty, not necessarily in our MD students. But it would be a policy that is all of the graduate students, all of the 5 undergrad programs, and all of the residents actually are held to account under the student academic integrity policy. Oops. And so a little bit more about AI, because I think that that's the point that makes all of us have some palpitations because it's evolving so quickly and the rules of engagement is not clear, right? This is happening in our academic spaces and it's happening in our clinical spaces. And um, I think all of us are a little uncertain on how to manage things. So using AI in itself is not misconduct. And AI hasn't changed any of the principles of what we would expect from instructors or students in that we just need to make sure we're clarifying our expectations of use. And so obviously inappropriate use of AI when the expectations are well set out, then that could potentially be misrepresentation of um, facts or plagiarism. One of the things that I've done in a course that I teach to the medical laboratory science students, it's a research course. So they are generating research. They're doing an independent research project and they're generating their final paper. And I have an artificial intelligence statement in my course syllabus. And I looked at it actually when I was putting these slides together and I was like, oh yeah, it's already, I created it last year. So for the fall of 25, just this year, um, it's already outdated because I talk about the very tight boundaries of what you could use AI for within my course. And so mostly as an editing tool, and I require that the students hand in the prompt so that I can see what they've done in the editing with the editing tool. But this year, um, I can see already that there's a new use for AI, and it's not in interpretation of the data, but it's helping them organize it. And so already, we're evolving and changing. And so one of the things that I've tried to instill in them is just ask. And so I have been fielding in the last couple of weeks lots of emails around, hey, could I use it for this? And sometimes when I suggest to them, they trying to do some sort of mathematical thing in Excel, and I'm like, I use Copilot to walk me through how to do those kinds of things, and then they're all a little bit apprehensive because they look at me like I've got two heads, that I would actually consider using it. So trying to also teach them how the tools can work for them, uh, hopefully part of what we're instilling in them. This is sort of the pathway that would happen if you come across something that's making you raise your eyebrows a little bit. And so on the practical side, what do we do if something just doesn't feel right? My first piece of advice would be to actually just pause, take a breath, don't don't move into any kind of action immediately, um, and avoid reaching out to the student and just sitting with it for a minute and sort of gathering your thoughts. Then the second piece would be to gather the information. So this is an evidence-based process, and so you want to spend some time thinking, okay, my intuition just telling me that there's something funny here, or is there actually data behind it? And then gather that. I would argue in our professional programs that 4 and 3 on this slide are probably flipped, in that uh, very rarely would an instructor in one of our professional programs at the undergrad level act alone. Most often, they're going to consult with the assistant dean, associate dean, us in the Office of Education, and sort of get some support prior to determining what should be done with the concern. One of the things that the new academic integrity policy did was that actually removed the requirement for instructors to talk directly to the student. And that's interesting from the perspective of other faculties across the university campus. So, for example, science had their rate of instructors submitting academic integrity concerns went up a couple of 100% in the first year that this policy was in play. And it was most likely attributed to the fact that instructors can now submit concerns without actually letting the student know or giving the student an opportunity to discuss it prior to this concern being logged. Um, Most often, somebody from the program will sit down with the student. It may be with the individual instructor, or like I said, it may be at the level of uh, assistant dean or that kind of a supervisor. Um, when we notify students that we would like to talk about something, um, we always want to make sure that we're telling them when we invite them to the meeting why. And we always want to make sure that they understand that they can bring an advisor to that meeting. So we're setting them up to come into that meeting, prepared. And again, framing everything from a place of curiosity. I noticed I've noticed this. I want an opportunity for your perspective. The goal here is I want to just understand. Um, and then at the end of that, the notification back to the student that under the student academic integrity policy, concerns are submitted. And then it's really at the discretion of the dean what happens next. And I know that for many of the biomedical science teachers within medicine and dentistry, that actually takes a lot of pressure off of them, right? Because they are able to preserve that relationship with the student. And it's up to the dean. They hand it off. And then the last part of that process is is actually sharing all of that documentation, the outcome if the student was talked to, and sort of there's a reporting process, a portal that we have that we use that's part of the College of Health Sciences. The same port, every faculty across campus uses the same portal, but ours reports into the College of Health Sciences. And once the College of Health Sciences gets that concern logged in the system, the very first thing that happens is that they actually send it to the Vice Dean of Education. And so how we're doing things in medicine and dentistry is a little bit different than the rest of campus. And for two reasons. One is we're pretty fortunate. We don't get many of these in a year. And so we can kid glove handle them and really put a focus on that educational piece for both the instructor, the program, and the student. And so the Vice Dean of Education will do an initial review of everything and will actually reach out to the student at that juncture. It might be then the second time that the student has talked about this, or it might be the first. The student is not obligated to meet with the Vice Dean, and should they not, they are then welcome to do a written submission. And at that meeting, they actually talk about the process and what the procedure for the policy actually looks like to make sure that they understand their options, to make sure that they understand what they're agreeing to, and that they understand the consequences of their decision. And so we changed to this kind of way of handling concerns in the very early days of this new policy being rolled out because we had a couple of um, students that were in science students that were taking FOMD courses where we weren't convinced that the students actually understood the decisions that they were making. And so the reason that becomes important is that big red box that I've got across this slide. So the Vice Dean of Education will meet with the student, gets the student's response and their perspective on the situation. And then she actually spends some time determining what pathway. So is this something that could be easily handled through this non-disciplinary route? Or is this so egregious that this is a formal complaint and an investigation will pursue? The student has the opportunity they're asked, how do you think that this should be handled? And if the student says complaint, we are beholden to go down that route. So it doesn't matter what the instructor thought. It doesn't matter what Dr. Shipper as the Vice Dean of Education thinks. If the student says complaint, we are automatically going down that route of investigation and potential sanctions. So that's one of the reasons why we want to sit students down and explain this to them. And also goes back to what I'd said earlier around how a student could actually enter into non-disciplinary accountability without admitting guilt. They're just taking responsibility for the situation. After the decision has been made on what pathway, the case then is turned over to the academic officer. And the reason that we've got this very, very convoluted way of handling things is that there's actually the two decision makers required in that policy. And by doing it this way and having Dr. Shipper triage every case, then the academic officer hasn't potentially had any bias because they've not been involved. And so literally it's here's a file and this will be an NDAO, or here's a file and this will be an investigation on a complaint. All right, and then what happens? I thought because this is so different, I thought maybe I'd spend a little bit of time talking about what are these NDAOs anyway, and the kinds of things that we've done in medicine and dentistry with them in this first year and a half. So they're completely voluntary, and the student can change their mind at any time. And if they do, or change their mind, or they do not complete the agreement, everything will go to complaint. And so then we will enter into that investigation route. So that's also kind of the fail safe, right? Like if the student really isn't taking accountability and they're just going through the motions, there's still that safety net for us. And so what happens is the academic officer and the student come to a written agreement. And I have, in bold, all caps, that is in collaboration with the program of particular importance in our professional programs where there's lots of times in whatever these educational pieces are in the NDAO are going to directly impact the program. We'd want to try to create in this written agreement some specific and measurable skills. And as an academic officer, I will meet with the instructor at least once. Um, and then we'll always follow up with them on what the outcome was. Sometimes they're quite involved in the NDAO, and then we would need their consent for them to participate. And here's the crux of these NDAOs. Once it's completed to the satisfaction of the academic officer, it's closed. It's over. And once a student graduates, it's gone. There is no permanent record that there was ever an academic integrity concern. And so, of course, if something were to go to complaint and was investigated, and there was a determination that the student had a misconduct activity, there could be sanctions applied that could, for example, end up on a transcript. Um, it also stays in their permanent record with the Student Accountability Office at central administration at the university forever. So that's something that would follow them. So that's was something very new and very hard for people to wrap their heads around when we first started this. So some of the examples of some of the things that uh, I've done with NDAOs is first of all that conversation with the instructor with the program on the assessment that was actually, the assessment that was plagiarized or the assessment that the student was caught cheating on. What was the impact of that? Is this the one and only time that competency will ever be assessed? Because that obviously changes the nature of what the NDAO might look like. Um, there quite often I will require some sort of professional reflection from the student, and I ask them to do that after they've done some educational modules. In one course I had in one of the undergrad programs, they there is a professional competency that's signed off. And the program was not comfortable signing off that competency when a student was under an NDAO. So their professional reflection was actually tailored around making sure that the program felt competent or confident that the student could have their professionalism competency signed off. So very much these are tailored individually every time. Uh, there are some modules that central administration through the Office of Conduct and Accountability have created that are about academic integrity. And so I more often than not will assign one of those. They're all asynchronous or can be done online. And I always ask the student not to, I don't have to go back over what happened and why, but I always ask them what they think would be the most informative and the most helpful so that this isn't a make work project. And they're usually pretty honest on what they think would be helpful. And more often than not, it leads to some sort of mental health, whether that be a workshop, some sort of appointment. I now have sort of a cadre of modules that they could be done asynchronously, uh, because more often than not, there's some sort of stress, anxiety, some sort of performance concern that's caused stress and anxiety that's actually led to the misconduct in the first place. There are through Central through our Academic Success Center, there are workshops on writing. There's workshops on plagiarism. So those are sometimes pretty helpful. Um, and I have asked students to write apology letters. I'm not really big on those, um, but they're a tool that I have used. Um, and then as far as the assessment goes, kind of done a little bit of everything, to be honest, from a 0 on the assessment still to a reduction on the grade of the assessment to allowing a reexamination on the assessment. So it sort of depends on, again, what is the proportionate response to the situation. So that is kind of academic integrity in 30 minutes or less. Some of the key messages that I was hoping to leave with you today, because like I said, this is the sort of stuff that you need in real time at that moment when you've hit that pause button, is when you truly actually um, need the material. And so if you could just take away from today that, really, if we start to frame academic integrity as this first part of professional identity formation, and that's our job is then to make sure that we are um, applying our expectations with clarity and consistency, and that we have this ability to take this restorative approach where we can just support students with their learning and accountability. And that as instructors, the pressure's kind of off because we will just document and then we share our concerns forward. And that really, truly, how we respond is going to help shape that student's learning and any, further professional development and is part of their professional development. So with that, the last thing that is here is some resources, and it's all hyperlinks. So where concerns would be reported, the policy itself, some training modules, and these are training modules for both learners and for instructors, if that's something that's of interest to you. And there is this academic integrity page for instructors as well. And I've given you Jocelyn Plemmel's email address. Jocelyn is the academic coordinator in the Office of Education, and she is a gold mine of information at the juncture when an instructor has hit that pause button and doesn't know what to do next.